The air inside St. Augustine's was thick with reverence. Easter morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting streaks of ruby and sapphire across the worn marble floors. The scent of white lilies and slow-burning beeswax mingled into a fragrance of purity and hope. For Clara Bell, it was the smell of home. From her seat in the front pew, she could see her father, Reverend Michael Bell, standing at the pulpit. His voice was a deep, calming baritone that resonated through the hallowed space, speaking of rebirth and forgiveness, themes he had spent his life preaching. Clara, at 24, clutched the worn hymnal in her hands. She loved these moments, the quiet fellowship of her community, the gentle swell of the pipe organ, and the solid, unwavering faith on her father's face. He was her lighthouse, her moral compass in a city like New Orleans, where the line between the sacred and the sinful was often as murky as the early morning fog on the Mississippi River. This city, with its jazz-haunted alleyways and whispered backroom deals, was a world her father had always tried to shield her from. He loathed the violence and illicit power that had seeped into the very bricks of New Orleans. Most of all, he loathed men like Luciano, DeSantis. The name drifted through Clara's mind like an unwelcome specter. DeSantis, a name synonymous with the criminal empire that had ruled the city's underworld for generations. A strange rumor had recently circulated through the community. DeSantis, the heir to that blood-soaked legacy, was trying to go straight. He had begun funding community projects, and most astonishingly, he had poured an immense sum of money into the restoration of St. Augustine's itself. Her father had accepted it with reluctance. "We cannot turn away a gift that can save the house of God, Clara," he'd said. "But remember, the devil's money cannot cleanse a stained soul." Clara had agreed. To her, DeSantis was the embodiment of everything her father stood against. He was the serpent in the garden, masking his venom with generosity. Reverend Bell smiled at his daughter from the pulpit, a look of boundless love. He began to read a passage of scripture, his voice rising with gentle authority. "And I say to you, love can conquer all." He never finished the sentence. The world turned white. A deafening roar swallowed the organ, her father's voice, and every other sound on earth. The marble floor bucked violently, and the stained glass saints shattered into a rain of crystalline confetti. Clara felt herself thrown backward, the air sucked from her lungs. After the white light came the silence, a heavy, unnatural silence that lasted only a second but felt like an eternity. And then the world began to scream. The screams were joined by the groan of collapsing masonry and the moans of the wounded. The air, fragrant with lilies moments before, was now a choking cloud of plaster dust and something metallic, something acrid and burnt. Clara coughed, gagging as she staggered to her feet. Her ears rang, but through the haze of chaos, a single horrifying thought consumed her. "Dad!" Her voice was a raw, broken whisper. She stumbled toward the chancel, toward the place where the pulpit used to be. Now, it was a mangled pile of splintered wood and fractured stone. Smoke billowed from a black, ragged hole where her father had stood. "Dad!" she screamed, her voice shattering with despair. She began clawing at the debris with her bare hands, sharp edges tearing at her skin without registering pain. The only pain was the panic strangling her heart. And then she saw it. A hand extending from beneath a heavy wooden beam, still wearing the simple silver ring her mother had given him. Clara collapsed to her knees, a guttural cry of anguish tearing from her soul. She took the hand in hers. It was cold. The next hours were a waking nightmare. The shriek of approaching sirens, strange faces pulling her away from the wreckage, voices murmuring condolences that were nothing but meaningless noise. She sat on the church steps, wrapped in a blanket, staring into nothingness as paramedics tended to the injured and carried away the dead. A man with a tired face and a wrinkled suit sat down beside her. "Miss Bell," he said, his voice raspy with dust. "I'm Detective Miles Corbin, NOPD. I'm so sorry for your loss." Clara didn't respond. She just stared at her hands, caked with the dust and the blood of her father. "We found a few things in the rubble," Corbin continued, his tone gentle but urgent. "Fragments of the explosive device. It was professionally made. This wasn't the work of some amateur." Clara finally looked up, her eyes hollow. "Who?" Who would do this? Corbin sighed, the weary breath of a man who had seen too much of his city's darkness. The detonation device. It has a specific signature, a type of custom circuitry we've only seen in one place. He paused, looking her directly in the eye. It's the trademark of an enforcer named Rico Vargas, a bomber for hire. The name meant nothing to Clara. I don't know him. No, you wouldn't, Corbin agreed. But this entire city knows who Rico Vargas works for. He let the statement hang in the air, allowing its weight to slowly sink in. An arctic chill shot down Clara's spine, colder than the shock of her grief. No, she whispered. It can't be. Luciano DeSantis, Corbin said the name, and it sounded like a curse. Rico Vargas has been his right hand for years. Everybody knows it. Hate, hot and violent, erupted in Clara's chest, incinerating her grief and leaving only the bitter ash of rage. Her father had been right. The serpent had struck. The devil's money didn't just fail to cleanse a soul, it bought bombs and death. Luke DeSantis. He had murdered her father. Maybe her father had discovered something about his businesses, or maybe this was just a brutal message to the entire city. Nowhere was safe from his reach, not even the house of God. Thank you, Detective, Clara said, her voice now terrifyingly cold and steady. She stood up, the blanket pooling at her feet. Miss Bell, where are you going? Corbin asked, alarmed by her sudden transformation. Let us handle this. Don't do anything on your own. But Clara didn't hear him. She had a singular purpose, a single name. She was going to face the devil himself. She was going to look into the eyes of the man who killed her father and make him answer for it. The journey to Luke DeSantis' stronghold felt like a descent into one of Dante's circles of hell. She moved through the vibrant streets of the French Quarter, past drunk tourists and the soulful wail of jazz spilling from open doorways, then turned onto the progressively darker, quieter avenues of the Garden District. Luke's residence wasn't a sprawling mansion, but a converted brick warehouse, an urban fortress with no windows on the ground floor. It radiated an aura of quiet, menacing power. Two men in black suits, built like stone monoliths, stopped her at the gate. I need to see Luciano DeSantis, Clara said, her voice devoid of any tremor. One of them smirked. The boss ain't seeing uninvited guests. Tell him Clara Bell is here, Reverend Michael Bell's daughter. She bit off each word, turning them into weapons. Tell him I know what he did. The men exchanged a look, the condescension on their faces dissolving into uncertainty. One pulled out a phone and spoke in low tones. A moment later, the heavy iron gate groaned open. The interior was another world, a vast minimalist space with exposed brick walls and dark leather furniture. There was no opulence, but everything screamed expensive, untouchable power. And in the center of it all, standing by a massive wooden desk, was him, Luciano DeSantis. He was tall, with a predator's coiled stillness contained within a perfectly tailored suit. His black hair was cut short, and his chiseled face might have been handsome were it not for the cold, ruthless stillness in his emerald green eyes that seemed to see everything and judge nothing. Miss Bell, he said, his voice a low, quiet rumble that filled the cavernous room. I heard about your father, a tragedy. Spare me your hypocrisy, Clara snarled, stalking forward until she was only a few feet from him. You call it a tragedy. I call it murder. The murder you ordered. Luke didn't flinch. He just watched her, those green eyes analyzing her, weighing her. You're making a serious accusation. The police found evidence, she said, her voice shaking with rage. Rico Vargas's signature was all over that bomb, and this whole damn city knows whose orders that dog follows. For the first time, an emotion flickered across Luke's face, something like weariness, a profound disgust. Rico Vargas no longer works for me, he said, his voice flat. I cut him loose 6 months ago. A convenient lie. It's the truth, Luke stated, his stillness beginning to unnerve her. She had come prepared for threats, for anger, for shouted denials. She was not prepared for this glacial calm. He was becoming too brutal, too unpredictable. He was a rabid dog, and I let him off his leash. And I'm supposed to take the word of a DeSantis? Clara laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Luke moved from behind the desk, stepping closer. Clara instinctively took a step back. You don't have to believe me, he said, his eyes locking onto hers. But you do need to be smart. Who benefits from this? An explosion in a church, killing a beloved public figure, with evidence that points directly at me just as I'm trying to change? Someone wants me to look like the monster everyone has always believed I am. The cold, sharp logic of his words pierced her wall of rage, creating a hairline fracture. But she shoved it away. You're trying to shift the blame. I'm trying to find the truth, he corrected, which is what you should be doing. Instead of charging in here making blind accusations. He stopped directly in front of her, towering over her. Your father was a good man. He didn't deserve to die like that. Don't you talk about my father, she hissed, hot tears finally breaking free. I will talk about him, Luke said, his voice softening unexpectedly. He took my money, even though he hated it, because he cared more about his church and his community than his own pride. That took courage, a different kind than yours, but courage nonetheless. Clara shook her head, confused by his change in tone. This monster, this murderer, was speaking of her father with respect. Go home, Clara, Luke said, using her first name. Let the police do their job. This is a world you don't belong in. I'm not going anywhere until my father gets justice, she declared. Justice, Luke repeated the word as if it had a foreign taste. In this city, justice isn't always found in a courtroom. His eyes hardened again, the coldness returning. But I will give you my word on this. I will find who did this, and I will make them pay. The promise hung between them, pregnant with menace and potential violence. Clara stared into his eyes, searching for a sign of deceit, but found only an icy resolve. She had come here to confront a simple monster, but the man before her was infinitely more complex and far more dangerous. She still believed he was guilty, but a small, toxic seed of doubt had been planted. Stay away from me, she said, her voice barely a whisper. A ghostly smile touched Luke's lips. I wish I could, Clara Bell, he said, but someone just pulled both of us into the middle of a war. And I don't intend to lose. Clara walked away from the warehouse, the heavy gate groaning shut behind her like the closing of a tomb. The New Orleans night, usually a symphony of distant music and cicadas, felt unnervingly silent. Luke's words echoed in her mind, a cold counterpoint to the hot rage that had driven her there. Someone wants me to look like the monster everyone has always believed I am. It was a serpent's logic, designed to twist the truth, to sow discord in her grief, and yet it had taken root. She found herself walking not home, but back toward the ruins of St. Augustine's. The area was now cordoned off with yellow police tape, a stark, profane boundary against a sacred space. Bathed in the cold, sterile glare of temporary floodlights, the church looked like a skeleton, its shattered windows like vacant eyes. The scent of lilies was gone, replaced by the damp, chalky smell of ruin. This was his doing, a DeSantis. The thought was an anchor in the swirling sea of her confusion. She had to hold on to it. It was the only thing that made sense. Her small apartment felt both like a sanctuary and a cage. For 2 days she existed in a fog, the world outside a muffled irrelevance. She ignored calls from concerned members of the congregation and mechanically filled out paperwork for her father's funeral arrangements. Sleep offered no escape, her dreams filled with the white flash of the explosion and the unnerving calm in Luke DeSantis's emerald eyes. On the 3rd day, Detective Corbin called. Miss Bell, just wanted to keep you in the loop, he said, his voice tired. We've issued a warrant for Rico Vargas, though he's gone to ground, as expected. Forensics confirmed the signature on the wiring. It's his work, no doubt. The DA is building a case against DeSantis. It's circumstantial, built on the known association, but it's strong. We're going to get him. Thank you, Detective, Clara said, her voice flat. She should have felt a surge of triumph, of vindication. Instead, a hollow echo of Luke's question reverberated within her. Who benefits from this? DeSantis, for all his monstrous power, was attempting a public reformation. A bombing, especially of a church he was funding, was an act of self-sabotage so blatant it bordered on the absurd. It was the move of a rabid dog, as he'd called Vargas, not a calculating king. That night she decided she needed air. The grief and suspicion were suffocating her. She walked through the quiet streets of her neighborhood, hands shoved deep into her pockets. The humidity hung heavy, a damp shroud over the city. She was halfway down her block when she noticed it. A black sedan, parked across the street, its engine off. It was too clean, too anonymous for the neighborhood. As she watched, a cigarette cherry glowed in the driver's side window. She felt a prickle on her skin, the primal instinct of being watched. She quickened her pace, turning the corner sharply. A moment later, she heard the soft crunch of tires as the sedan followed. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced her grief-numbed senses. This wasn't the police. This wasn't surveillance. This was a message. She broke into a run, her heart hammering against her ribs, the sound of her own ragged breaths loud in her ears. She didn't stop until she was back inside her apartment, the deadbolt thrown, her back pressed against the door. Her entire body trembled. The intimidation was crude, thuggish. It lacked the chilling subtlety she would expect from a man like Luke DeSantis. His power, as the city's whispers attested, was a ghost, felt everywhere, seen nowhere. This felt different. This was the work of wolves, not the lion who ruled the pride. The next morning she called Corbin. "I was followed last night, detective. A black car." There was a pause on the line. "Miss Bell," he said, his voice laced with a patronizing sympathy that made her skin crawl. "You've been through a tremendous trauma. It's natural to feel paranoid, to see threats where there are none." "This wasn't paranoia," she insisted, her voice rising. "They were sending a message." "Or," Corbin countered, his tone hardening slightly, "it was DeSantis's people, making sure you don't talk to us anymore. It's a classic intimidation tactic, which is why you need to let us handle this. Stay home. Stay safe. Don't engage." The call ended, leaving Clara with a chilling realization. The police either wouldn't or couldn't protect her. To them, she was a grieving daughter, an unreliable witness caught in the gears of a much larger machine. They saw a straight line from Rico Vargas to Luke DeSantis, and they weren't interested in any detours. She was alone, completely and utterly alone. That evening, fury eclipsing fear, she made a choice. She wouldn't be a pawn in this deadly game. If Corbin wouldn't listen, if the city's protectors were blind, then she would seek answers from its darkness. She found her way to a dimly lit jazz club in the Marigny, a place called the Blue Dahlia. The name had come to her in a flash of memory, a snippet of conversation she'd overheard at the church fundraiser, linking the club to Luke's legitimate business interests. The interior was a haze of smoke and sorrowful saxophone notes. The air smelled of bourbon and old secrets. He was there, seated in a secluded booth in the back, nursing a glass of amber liquid. He wasn't surrounded by guards. His presence alone was enough to create a perimeter of respect and fear. When he saw her approaching, his expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed with an unreadable intensity. "I told you to stay away," he said as she slid into the booth opposite him. His voice was low, barely audible over the music. "Your advice is becoming increasingly difficult to follow," she shot back, her hands clenched into fists on the table. "I was followed last night." Luke's posture shifted, a subtle coiling of tension. "Describe the car, the men." She gave him the sparse details. He listened without interruption, his gaze fixed on her face. "Not my people," he said when she finished. The statement was flat, absolute. "My men are invisible. Those were street thugs, hired muscle. The police think they were yours, a warning to keep me quiet." A humorless smile touched his lips. "Corbin is a decent cop, but he's out of his depth. He sees the monster he's been chasing for a decade and can't imagine any other beast in the jungle." He leaned forward, the faint light glinting in his eyes. "They weren't warning you to be quiet, Clara. They were testing my reaction. They wanted to see if the lion would roar when his interest was threatened." The possessive implication in his words made a shiver trace its way down her spine. "I am not your interest." "Aren't you?" he countered softly. "You walked into my fortress and accused me of murder. You are the daughter of the man I'm accused of killing, and you are the only person in this city who doesn't seem to be afraid of me. That makes you very interesting." Clara took a breath, steeling herself. "I don't believe you're innocent, but I'm starting to believe someone else is involved, someone who wants you to take the fall." Luke's expression remained impassive, but she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a grudging respect. "And what do you want from me?" Answers, she said. The truth. He leaned back, swirling the liquid in his glass. The truth is a commodity in this city, Clara, and it always comes with a price. He met her gaze, his eyes pinning her in place. You want answers? You get them on my terms. I need to know who is moving against me, and they've made it clear they see you as a vector. That means you stay where I can see you. You do exactly as I say. No more lone walks at night. No more blind faith in a police force that's already decided the outcome. It was the offer of a gilded cage. Protection, but at the cost of her freedom, her agency. It was a deal with the devil. But the devil was the only one speaking a language that made sense. What's in it for you? She asked, her voice a low murmur. Why help me? Because, he said, his voice dropping even lower, that bomb wasn't just an attack on your father. It was an attack on me. They used my history, my reputation, as a weapon. They desecrated a church I was funding to frame me for a crime I didn't commit. This is business, and it has become deeply personal. He took a slow sip of his drink. And I don't like it when my name is attached to sloppy, sentimental work. A church? On Easter? It's obscenely theatrical. The cold pragmatism of his statement was more convincing than any plea of innocence could have been. Fine, she heard herself say, the word tasting like surrender. On your terms. A ghost of a smile haunted his lips. Good. He finished his drink in one smooth motion and stood up. Let's go. Go where? Somewhere safe. He didn't offer his hand. He simply expected her to follow, and she did, leaving the soulful lament of the saxophone behind. He led her not to the warehouse, but to a private elevator in the back of an opulent downtown hotel. It ascended without stopping to a penthouse that overlooked the glittering crescent of the city. The space was like him, vast, minimalist, and radiating a silent, formidable power. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the Mississippi River snaking below like a dark ribbon. No one will find you here, he said, his back to her as he stared out at the view. My men are securing your apartment, gathering your things. They'll be discreet. Clara felt a fresh wave of panic. You can't just move me. I have a life. My father's funeral is in 2 days. He turned to face her, his expression unyielding. You will attend the funeral. I will be there with you. You, she scoffed. The man everyone thinks killed him? Precisely, he said, his voice like ice. My presence will be a statement. It will tell our real enemy that I am not running, and that you are under my protection. It will draw them out. He was using her grief as a piece on his bloody chessboard. She hated him for it, but she also knew he was right. She was already in the game. He was just offering her a side with a better chance of survival. His gaze softened fractionally. I know this is difficult, but this is the only way to get the justice you want. He gestured to a small library off the main living area. I've been doing my own digging. Corbin is looking for Vargas. I'm looking for who paid him. He walked over to a heavy oak desk and picked up a single sheet of paper. Rico Vargas didn't just use any circuitry. He used a batch with a specific manufacturing flaw, a batch that was part of a larger shipment of illegal arms. He handed her the paper. It was a shipping manifest, dated 7 months prior. I seized this shipment from a rival outfit, Luke explained. Most of it was destroyed, but a few crates, including the one with the flawed detonators, were stolen from my own warehouse a month later. An inside job. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. I sold nothing to a rival. It was stolen from me, by someone I trusted. His gaze drifted to a collection of framed photographs on the wall, photos she hadn't noticed before. They were old black and white images of a younger Luke with other men, all of them radiating a dangerous camaraderie. But one photo stood apart. It showed an older man who must have been his father, his arm around another man who looked strikingly familiar. Clara stepped closer, her heart beginning to pound in a new, sickening rhythm. The other man in the photo, smiling beside the infamous patriarch of the DeSantis crime family, was her own father, Michael Bell. He looked young, no older than she was now, and the world of difference from the gentle reverend she knew. She looked from the photograph to Luke, whose eyes were now fixed on her, watching her reaction. The seed of doubt that had been planted in her heart had just sprouted into a terrifying, thorny vine. Her father, the man of God, stood smiling beside a Mafia kingpin. "It seems," Luke said, his voice a low, dangerous murmur that wrapped around her in the silent penthouse, "that our families have a history you knew nothing about." The silence in the penthouse was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Clara stared at the photograph, the black and white image, a portal to a past she couldn't comprehend. Her father, Michael Bell, the man whose entire existence was a testament to faith and righteousness, stood beside the devil himself, Antonio DeSantis. They were young, their smiles unburdened by the separate kingdoms they would one day rule. The image was an impossibility, a heresy against the core tenets of her own life. "What is this?" she finally whispered, her voice a fragile thread in the vast empty room. She turned to face Luke, her eyes pleading for a lie, for any explanation that would restore the world to its proper axis. Luke's gaze was steady, his emerald eyes holding a deep, ancient weariness. "That," he said, his voice a low rumble, "is the original sin of our story, Clara. The secret both our fathers carried to their graves." He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, the city lights below casting a cold, distant glow on his face. "My father and yours, they grew up together, in the same dirt-poor tenements of the Irish Channel, long before this city knew either of their names. They were boys who stole bread together, who fought together, who dreamed of escaping the swamp of poverty that was meant to swallow them whole." He paused, his reflection a ghostly figure against the night sky. "But they chose different escapes. My father chose power. He built an empire with his fists and his wits, believing that money and fear were the only walls strong enough to keep the swamp at bay. Your father," he turned, his eyes finding hers across the room, "he chose God. He believed faith was the only true sanctuary." Clara sank into one of the leather armchairs, her legs suddenly unable to support her. The story felt like a fiction, a grim fairy tale. "They were never friends, not in the way you'd understand," Luke continued, his voice devoid of sentimentality. "They were two sides of the same coin, minted in the same fire. They understood each other's hunger because they came from the same starvation. They went their separate ways, but a connection remained, a secret. My father, for all his sins, respected Michael's choice. He saw it as a path he might have taken in another life. So what? They met for coffee?" Clara's voice was laced with a bitter sarcasm. "No," Luke said. "My father began to fund him, anonymously. The first soup kitchen your father opened, the youth outreach programs, that was DeSantis money. It was my father's penance, I think. A way to keep one small corner of his world clean, a tithe to the man he used to be." The revelation struck Clara with the force of a physical blow. Her father's legacy, his life's work, was built on a foundation of blood money. The very good he had done in the world was financed by the evil he preached against. She felt a wave of nausea. "He lied to me," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "My whole life, he lied to me." "He protected you," Luke corrected, his voice softening with an unexpected empathy. "He built a wall between his world and mine to keep you safe. He took dirty money and washed it clean by doing good. He made a devil's bargain, Clara, to build a saint's legacy." He walked back towards the desk, and I continued it. "Funding the church wasn't just a PR move. It was the continuation of a debt I felt my family owed yours." The complexity of it was dizzying. Her father wasn't a simple martyr. He was a man who had walked a tightrope over a pit of moral ambiguity. And Luke was not just a monster. He was the inheritor of a legacy as tangled and contradictory as her own. The lines between saint and sinner, good and evil, had blurred into an incomprehensible gray. "The funeral is in 2 days," she said, her voice hollow. "You can't be there." "I have to be," he countered, his tone hardening once more into the familiar steel of command. "Our enemy expects me to hide. They expect you to stand alone, a grieving daughter pointing the finger at me. We will give them neither. We will stand together. It's the only move we have left." The day of the funeral was gray and oppressive, the New Orleans sky weeping a fine, mournful mist. St. Louis Cathedral, chosen for its size, was filled to overflowing. The city's establishment was there, the mayor, council members, business leaders, all present to pay their respects to the man who had been their collective conscience. Clara sat in the front pew, a black veil shielding her face, though it did little to hide the tremors in her hands. She felt his presence before she saw him. A sudden hush fell over the congregation, a wave of silence that started at the back of the cathedral and rolled forward. Whispers followed like the rustle of dry leaves. Clara looked up. Luke DeSantis was walking down the central aisle. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his perfectly tailored black suit a stark contrast to the sea of more conventional mourners. He was alone, his usual guards nowhere in sight. His face was a mask of cold composure. But as he walked, his eyes scanned the crowd, a silent challenge to anyone who dared to meet his gaze. He looked like a panther that had wandered into a flock of sheep, and the flock was terrified. He reached the front pew and, ignoring the empty space on the other side of the aisle, sat down directly beside Clara. A collective gasp rippled through the cathedral. He had crossed an invisible line, a public declaration that shocked the city's elite to their core. Detective Corbin, standing near the altar, stiffened, his hand instinctively moving toward his jacket. He started toward them, his face a grim mask of official disapproval. DeSantis, Corbin's voice was a low growl. This is a house of God. Show some respect and leave. Luke didn't even turn his head. His gaze remained fixed on the altar, where Reverend Bell's casket lay draped in white. I am showing respect, detective, he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the unnatural silence. To a man my family has known for over 40 years. He then turned his head slowly, his emerald eyes locking with Corbin's. And I'm here to support his daughter in her time of grief. You have a problem with that? The threat was unspoken but absolute. It wasn't just a question. It was a line drawn in the sand. Corbin froze, caught between his duty and the very real, very dangerous power emanating from the man in the pew. He looked at Clara, his expression a mixture of pity and frustration, as if to say, "You've chosen your side." He gave a curt nod and retreated, defeated. Clara felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on her. They were judging her, condemning her. The daughter of the murdered reverend, sitting beside his killer. She wanted to shrink, to run, to scream that it wasn't what it looked like. But she sat still, her posture rigid, her hands clasped in her lap. This was her role in the play. She was the bait, and the devil was her protector. As the eulogies began, she could feel the heat of Luke's presence beside her, a strange and terrifying comfort in the cold, cavernous space. Back at the penthouse, the facade shattered. The moment the heavy door clicked shut behind them, Clara's composure crumbled. A sob tore from her throat, a raw, ragged sound of grief and rage and confusion. She stumbled towards the window, wrapping her arms around herself as if to hold her splintering world together. Luke remained by the door, giving her space. He took off his suit jacket, tossing it over a chair, and loosened his tie, the formal armor of the funeral cast aside. He didn't speak, just watched her, his face etched with an emotion she couldn't name. They all think you did it, she finally choked out, her words muffled by her hands. And they think I've betrayed my father by letting you near me. What they think doesn't matter, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. All that matters is the truth. And what is the truth, Luke? She spun around to face him, her eyes blazing. That my father was entangled with your criminal family? That his life's work was built on a lie? That you're innocent? He walked toward her slowly. The truth is that our fathers were complicated men. The truth is that I did not kill him. And the truth is that the person who did is still out there, and they are using you to get to me. He stopped a few feet from her. I remember my own father's funeral. The hypocrisy of men who hated him pretending to mourn. The whispers of rivals sizing me up, wondering if the son was as strong as the father. The loneliness of it. His voice was raw, stripped of its usual defenses. No one should have to go through that alone. The shared, painful memory was a bridge between their two vastly different worlds. In that moment, he wasn't a mafia boss, and she wasn't a reverend's daughter. They were just two people who had lost their fathers to the violence of the city. He let the silence stretch, allowing her to process, before his voice hardened again. It's time you knew who we're hunting. He gestured toward the library. The man who stole the explosives, who hired Vargas, who wants my empire. His name is Leo Falcone. He spoke the name with a particular kind of venom, the kind reserved for betrayal. He wasn't just an associate, he was family. We grew up together. My father took him in when his own family cast him out. He was supposed to be my brother. He looked at the photos on the wall, his jaw tight. But he was always jealous. My father saw the recklessness in him, the insatiable ambition. When he named me his successor, Leo saw it as the ultimate betrayal. He's been waiting in the shadows ever since, looking for a weakness, and he thinks he's found one. Clara followed him into the library, her mind reeling. So what do we do? We have to tell the police. Luke gave a short, harsh laugh. And tell them what? That my suspicions are based on a gut feeling in a stolen shipping manifest? Corbin would laugh me out of his office. No, we don't go to the police. We find our own proof. He spread a map of the city across the desk. Leo is smart. He'll be hidden. But he's also arrogant. He'll need a base of operations, somewhere he feels untouchable. His finger traced a line along the industrial canal. He'll be in the old quarter, in the places the police don't go. And he'll have Vargas with him. We find Vargas, we find Leo. For the next few days, the penthouse became a command center. Clara was a prisoner in a sky palace, watching as Luke orchestrated a silent, invisible war. Men with hard eyes and quiet voices came and went, delivering whispered reports and leaving with clipped orders. Clara, feeling useless, turned to her own investigation. She spent hours on her laptop, diving into digitized city archives, old newspaper articles, searching for any link between her father and the DeSantis family. She found little, just a few mentions of Reverend Bell's early charity work, always described as being funded by anonymous benefactors. The lies were neat, tidy, and decades old. The strange, forced domesticity was unnerving. She would wake up in the luxurious guest suite to find coffee and a newspaper waiting for her. In the evenings, Luke would return, the lethal chill of the outside world still clinging to him, and they would share a silent meal, the unspoken questions and growing tension, a third presence at the table. One night, she couldn't sleep. The city below was a glittering, indifferent tapestry. She found Luke on the balcony, a silhouette against the skyline, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "You shouldn't be up," he said without turning around. "Neither should you," she retorted, walking to stand beside him. The air was cool, a welcome respite from the recycled atmosphere of the penthouse. "I don't sleep much," he admitted. He finally turned to look at her, his eyes dark and shadowed. "What do you think about when you can't sleep?" The question was personal, unexpected. "My father," she answered honestly. "I try to reconcile the man I knew with the man in that photograph. I wonder if he was happy." Luke was silent for a long moment. "I think he was," he said finally. "He chose a life of purpose. That's more than most men get." "And you?" she asked, her voice soft. "Do you have a life of purpose?" A bitter smile twisted his lips. "I have a life of obligation, of legacy. It's not the same thing." He looked out at the city, his city. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like, to just be a man, not a name, not a symbol. To walk down a street and not have people look at you with fear or greed." He glanced at her, a strange vulnerability in his eyes. "You're the only one who looks at me and doesn't see a ghost." The intimacy of the moment was breathtaking, a fragile truce in the midst of a war. She could feel the pull, the dangerous attraction to the broken man behind the monster's mask. Before she could say anything, a phone on the table inside buzzed, a low, urgent sound. Luke's body went rigid, the brief moment of peace shattered. He strode inside and answered it, his back to her. His conversation was short, his words clipped. "Where? Are you certain? Hold your position. I'm on my way." He hung up and turned to her, his face once again a mask of cold command. The vulnerable man was gone, replaced by the kingpin. "We found him," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We know where Leo is hiding." The air in the penthouse crackled with a lethal energy. The kingpin had shed the last vestiges of the contemplative man from the balcony, replaced by a cold, efficient general preparing for war. He moved with a predatory economy of motion, speaking in low, clipped tones into a secure satellite phone. Men whose loyalty was etched into the hard lines of their faces materialized in the apartment, their presence turning the luxurious space into a tactical operations center. They laid out blueprints, satellite images, and weapons with a quiet, terrifying professionalism. Clara watched from the doorway of the library. a ghost at the edge of their grim council. She was supposed to be the protected piece, the precious cargo kept safe while the storm raged. But every cell in her body rebelled against the role. Her father had died because of this war. She would not hide while his memory was used as a justification for more bloodshed. She walked into the center of the room, her small frame a stark contrast to the hardened men around her. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her, then flickered to Luke, waiting for his reaction. "I'm going with you," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. Luke ended his call, his eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "Absolutely not." "You told me this was a world I didn't belong in," she countered, her gaze locking with his. "You were wrong. The moment Leo Falcone blew up my father's church and framed you, he made me a part of this world. I will not sit here and wait for you to bring me back a piece of what you call justice. I will see it for myself." "This isn't a debate, Clara. It's a slaughterhouse. Leo and Vargas are cornered animals. They will be vicious. And I," she said, stepping closer until she was directly in front of him, "am the daughter of a man who was murdered. I have a right to face his killer." She saw the conflict in his eyes, the instinct to protect her warring with the grudging respect for the courage he'd admired from the very beginning. "You said we would draw them out by standing together. We started that at the funeral. We will finish it now." He stared at her for a long, tense moment, the silent battle raging behind his eyes. Finally, he gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "Fine," he bit out, the words surrendering to her will. He turned to one of his men. "Give her a vest. She stays beside me. No exceptions. If she gets a scratch, I will hold every single one of you personally responsible." The threat was delivered in a near whisper, but it carried more weight than a shout. The journey to the old quarter was a descent into the city's forgotten underbelly. They traveled in a convoy of black, armored SUVs, gliding through rain-slicked streets and past derelict buildings that sagged under the weight of humidity and history. The air grew thick with the smell of the canal, a pungent mix of salt, decay, and stagnant water. It was a place where the city's bright, vibrant mask was stripped away, revealing the rot beneath. Their destination was a sprawling, skeletal shipyard, a graveyard of rusted cranes and decaying warehouses, looming like ancient beasts against the bruised purple sky. Luke's men moved with silent, fluid precision, establishing a perimeter. Their movements a deadly, synchronized ballet. Luke pulled Clara close as they exited the vehicle, his body a shield against the imagined threats lurking in the shadows. "He's in the main processing warehouse," Luke murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Vargas has rigged the entrances. We go in through the roof." The ascent up a rusty fire escape was terrifying. The wind whipped in from the Gulf, carrying the taste of rain and the mournful cry of a distant foghorn. Below, the dark water of the canal churned against the pilings. Inside the warehouse, the scene was one of calculated chaos. In the center of the vast, cavernous space, illuminated by the harsh glare of portable floodlights, stood Leo Falcone. He was flanked by Rico Vargas, a twitchy, wiry man with the dead eyes of a jackal. They were surrounded by a dozen heavily armed thugs. Leo looked up as Luke and Clara descended from a catwalk, a theatrical, welcoming smile spreading across his face. "Luciano, brother!" he called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I knew you'd come, and you brought the little church mouse with you. How touching." "It's over, Leo," Luke said, his voice dangerously calm. He and Clara stopped at the bottom of the stairs, his arm a protective barrier in front of her. "Over?" Leo laughed, a high, unhinged sound. "It's just beginning. For years I stood in your shadow, your father's shadow. He preached loyalty, but he chose you, his blood over me, his brother in every way that mattered. He left me scraps from the table while he handed you a kingdom," his face contorted with a lifetime of resentment. "So I decided to build my own. And the first stone in my new foundation is the rubble of yours. You murdered an innocent man." Clara's voice cut through the tension, clear and cold as a bell. "You bombed a church." Leo's gaze slid to her, his eyes glittering with a feverish intensity. "Sacrifices, my dear. Your father was a symbol, and by killing him and framing Luke, I accomplished two things. I crippled my rival's reputation, and created the chaos I needed to consolidate power. It was business. And art. There was no art in it. Luke's voice dropped to a lethal growl. It was the sloppy, sentimental act of a child throwing a tantrum. The insult hit its mark. Leo's smile vanished. You always did that, he hissed. Looked down on me. Judged me. Well, who's judging now? He gestured around the warehouse. I have the detonators your father thought he'd destroyed. I have the loyalty of men tired of your new, legitimate direction. And I have your weakness. His eyes fixed on Clara. At that moment, everything happened at once. Luke's men began to emerge from the shadows, a coordinated, silent assault. Gunfire erupted, the deafening cracks echoing off the steel walls. Luke shoved Clara behind a stack of massive, rotting crates, his body shielding hers as bullets ricocheted around them. Stay down, he roared over the din. But Clara's eyes were locked on something else. During Leo's monologue, she had seen Rico Vargas subtly manipulating a small remote device in his hand, and she saw where he was looking, not at them, but at the massive, rusted cranes outside the warehouse, their booms looming directly over the roof. The roof they had just come through. It wasn't just the entrances he had rigged. Luke, the roof! She screamed, grabbing his arm. It's a trap! The whole place is wired. Luke's eyes followed her gaze and understanding dawned with cold horror. This wasn't a firefight. It was a demolition. Leo didn't plan to win. He planned to obliterate. Everyone out! Fall back! Luke yelled into his comms. He grabbed Clara's hand, pulling her toward a side exit. But Leo stood in their way, a manic, triumphant grin on his face. No one is leaving, he shrieked, raising his own gun. We all go to hell together, brother. Luke pushed Clara behind him, drawing his weapon. The world narrowed to the space between two men who had once been family. But as they faced off, a groaning, metallic screech tore through the air from above. Vargas had hit the button. Clara didn't think. She acted. While Leo's attention was on Luke, she grabbed a heavy, discarded wrench from the floor and threw it with all her might, not at Leo, but at the floodlight beside him. The bulb exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging their immediate area into disorienting darkness. In that split second of confusion, Luke moved. He didn't fire. He lunged forward, tackling Leo in a brutal, bone-jarring collision. The two men crashed to the concrete floor, a tangle of limbs and fury. Vargas, blinded by the sudden darkness, fired wildly before being taken down by one of Luke's men. Above them, the roof began to collapse, a cascade of twisted steel and shattered concrete. Luke subdued Leo with a final, decisive blow, then hauled him to his feet. He dragged his former brother toward the exit, shoving him ahead of them as they burst out into the misty night, just as the entire warehouse imploded behind them in a deafening roar. They stood on the wet asphalt, panting, the night air filled with dust and the smell of cordite. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Luke held Leo in a chokehold, his face a grim, terrible mask in the flashing emergency lights. You see, Leo? He said, his voice a ragged whisper. This is the difference between us. You were willing to die to destroy me. I am willing to live to protect what is mine. He didn't kill him. He simply held him until Corbin's squad cars screeched to a halt around them. He released Leo, who crumpled to the ground and shoved him toward the detective. He confessed, Detective, Luke said, his voice regaining its cold composure. Bombing the church, hiring Vargas. You'll find the remote detonator on Vargas's body inside. A neat and tidy package for you. Corbin stared from the rubble to Leo, to Luke, and finally to Clara, who stood, trembling but unharmed, at Luke's side. He saw the whole impossible picture, and for the first time, a flicker of understanding crossed his tired face. He didn't ask how Luke knew. He just nodded grimly and cuffed a sputtering Leo Falcone. As the police secured the scene, Luke turned to Clara. He gently brushed a smudge of dirt from her cheek, his touch belying the violence of the last few minutes. Are you all right? She nodded, her throat too tight for words. She had been terrified, but she had also felt a strange, fierce clarity. She had not been a victim. She had been a participant. They drove back to the penthouse in silence, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving a bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. The war was over. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale, hopeful light over the city. Inside, with the door shut against the world, they finally looked at each other. The events of the night had stripped away the last of their pretenses. He was no longer just the Mafia boss, and she was no longer just the reverend's daughter. They were two survivors, bound by a shared violent baptism. "My father's justice," she said softly. "It wasn't clean. It wasn't simple. It was this." "It was New Orleans justice," Luke said, his voice heavy. He walked to the bar and poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handing one to her. "He's at peace, Clara, and his killer will pay for what he did, just in a court of law instead of a back alley." She took a sip, the fiery liquid a shock to her system. "And you? Are you at peace?" He looked at his hands as if expecting to see blood on them. "I almost killed him," he admitted, his voice low. "The old instincts, they screamed at me to finish it, to erase the threat permanently." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "But I thought of you. I thought of the man you believe I can be, and I chose a different path, a harder one." In that moment, Clara finally understood. Forgiveness wasn't about absolving sins. It was about accepting the tangled, messy truth of who someone was and who they were trying to become. Her father had made a deal with the devil to do God's work, and Luke had stared into the abyss of his own nature and chosen to step back from the edge. For her, she closed the distance between them, her small hands coming up to frame his face. She saw the guilt, the exhaustion, and the profound loneliness in his eyes. Her faith, once housed in the stone walls of a church, had been shattered and then rebuilt, its new foundation not in a distant heaven, but in the flawed, complex, and courageous heart of the man standing before her. "I forgive you, Luke," she whispered. It wasn't for her father's death, which he had not caused. It was for everything else. For the world he came from, for the sins of his father, for the darkness he fought within himself. And then, with a certainty that felt more sacred than any prayer she had ever uttered, she said, "And I love you." A single tear traced a path down his stoic face. He leaned down and kissed her, not with the desperate passion of their first encounters, but with a deep, reverent tenderness. It was a kiss of homecoming, of two fractured souls finding sanctuary in each other. It held the promise not of an easy life, but of a shared one. The city was waking up below them, its sins and its spirituals rising with the morning mist. But in the quiet of the penthouse, high above the streets, a former kingpin and a reverend's daughter had found their own kind of grace, a faith forged not in a church, but in the crucible of their shared darkness, and a forgiveness that was, in the end, the most powerful kind of love.